Zephyr's eyes bulged, pulsing with purple blood and unchecked fury, as he slammed 3 appendages on the council lectern. Chilling news! The Recon fleet investigating the Orion sector, hunting a new FTL-capable species, has gone dark. Chattering bursted from the dozens of alien species, each uniquely concerned about what new terrors lurked in that harsh region of space. Some envisioned plasma torpedoes ripping into their world's cracking crust. Others feared their fleets would fall next. Now the humans staked an aggressive claim to distant hyperspace lanes. The last First Contact nearly imploded millennia of galactic peace. Upstart spacers had united their patchwork territories to arm against the Council threat. Yet wise minds prevailed, and brokered coexistence between the known races. Discovery of a bellicose new power would rattle that foundation. Dread and doubt soaked the Council chambers. Zephyr's second, a hulking reptilian named Raxus, barked orders at the central astromap terminal. Initiate a sweep of the Orion sector. Track any debris that matches our missing Recon vessels. A thick human with scars over his bald pink skull stepped forward. George Shaw was born on the frontier, where hardship carved many a void sailor into an unstable or toughened creature. His swagger told every onlooker he fell into the latter category. The man always had a zeal for any military mission with a body count. Send me. I'll find those lost ships and figure out who turned them into floating junk. And these galactic newcomers, George snarled. I'll teach them a lesson about who owns this slice of the void. Murmurs of assent spread through the hall. There were few better to scout and engage an unknown threat. Fewer still hoped it would come to that. Zephyr glared but nodded. You will reconnoiter the Orion sector and report back with our Recon fleet status. If a new species has emerged, determine their capabilities and intent. The human grunted, giving a lazy salute. And if they're hostile, don't hold back. Do what you need to protect this council. Our very existence is at stake. Zephyr's dismissal rang with the gravity of the crisis at hand. George Shaw's ship sliced through the dark void, sensors probing for any sign of the lost Recon fleet. The Orion sector grew larger in the viewscreen, an expanse of unfamiliar stars and planets. As they neared the last known coordinates, the crew fell silent, eyes glued to their instruments. I don't like this, Mikhail muttered, checking the scanners. No comm traffic, no energy signatures, it's too quiet. George leaned forward in his chair, his scarred face grim. Keep looking. They've got to be out there somewhere. Minutes ticked by, the tension on the bridge rising with each passing second. Suddenly the sensors pinged. Sir, I've got something, the science officer reported, her voice tight. Debris field bearing 327.8 matches the composition of our Recon ships. George's breath caught in his throat. On screen. The viewscreen filled with the shattered remains of the fleet, twisted metal and frozen bodies drifting in the void. The crew stared in horror, the sight searing itself into their minds. Scan for life signs, anything, George ordered, his voice rough. And start analyzing that wreckage. I want to know what the hell happened here. The crew set to work, fingers flying over their consoles. George paced the bridge, his unease growing with each step. After what felt like an eternity, the science officer spoke up again. Captain, I'm picking up a faint distress signal. It's coming from a nearby planet, one that's not on any of our charts. George moved to her station, studying the readouts. The planet was a dark, foreboding sphere, its surface obscured by dense forests and a thick, hazy atmosphere. What do you think? He asked, glancing at Mikhail. The second-in-command frowned, his eyes narrowed. I don't like it, sir. We have no idea what's down there. It could be a trap. George hesitated, weighing the options. The distress signal could be a clue to what happened to the Recon fleet, or it could be a lure, drawing them into the same fate. But he had his orders, and his duty was clear. We're going in, he decided, his jaw set. Helm, take us into orbit, prep a landing party. As the ship descended through the atmosphere, the systems began to flicker and glitch. Strange, garbled transmissions flooded the comm channels, the alien language grating and unsettling. George felt a chill run down his spine as they touched down on the surface, the towering trees casting eerie shadows across the landscape. He checked his weapon, the weight familiar in his hands. "Mikhail, you're with me," he said, nodding to a few other trusted officers. "We'll locate the source of that distress signal. The rest of you, stay with the ship. Keep the engines hot and be ready to bug out at a moment's notice." The landing party set out into the forest, the thick undergrowth clinging to their boots. The air was heavy and oppressive, filled with the distant calls of unknown creatures. As they trekked deeper into the woods, George couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Unseen eyes seemed to track their every move, the hair on the back of his neck standing on end. He exchanged a glance with Mikhail, seeing his own unease reflected in the other man's eyes. Whatever awaited them in the heart of this alien world, George knew it would test the limits of their courage and resolve. As they ventured further into the heart of the alien forest, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to close in around them, the shadows growing deeper and more sinister with each step. George's hand tightened on his weapon, his senses on high alert for any sign of danger. Suddenly they stumbled into a clearing that seemed too perfect to be natural, a flawless circle carved out of the dense foliage. In the center of the clearing stood a towering monolith, its obsidian surface etched with intricate alien glyphs that pulsed with an eerie green light. The air around the structure hummed with an unseen energy, setting George's teeth on edge. Cautiously, George approached the monolith, his hand outstretched as if drawn by some unseen force. Mikhail grabbed his arm, stopping him in his tracks. "Captain, look," he said, his voice tight with tension, as he pointed to the base of the structure. George followed his gaze and felt his blood run cold. A pile of bones and tattered uniforms lay scattered at the foot of the monolith, arranged in a grotesque, ritualistic pattern. The remains were unmistakably human, and the uniforms bore the insignia of the missing Recon fleet. Before they could process the grim discovery, a piercing shriek echoed through the forest, sending a chill down George's spine. A swarm of insectoid creatures burst from the undergrowth, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming in the dim light. They were the size of large dogs, with razor-sharp mandibles that snapped and clacked as they charged towards the landing party. George and his men opened fire, but the creatures' armored hides deflected the weapons' fire like rain off a tin roof. The team fought desperately, trying to hold the creatures at bay, but they were quickly overwhelmed. Several of George's men were dragged away into the darkness, their screams of terror fading into the distance. Battered and bleeding, George and the remaining members of his team regrouped, their breathing ragged and their eyes wide with fear. As he studied the monolith more closely, George realized that it was acting as some sort of beacon, drawing the creatures to it like moths to a flame. The glyphs on the monolith's surface nagged at his memory, and with a start, he realized where he had seen them before. They were identical to the ones found on ancient ruins scattered throughout the galaxy, ruins that predated any known civilization. With a grim sense of determination, George made the decision to destroy the monolith, hoping to cut off the signal and buy them time to escape. As they set the charges, a deep, resonant hum began to emanate from the structure, shaking the ground beneath their feet and setting their teeth on edge. The hum grew louder and more intense, the vibrations coursing through their bodies like an electric current. George exchanged a worried glance with Mikhail, wondering what fresh horrors the monolith had in store for them. The alien glyphs pulsed faster, the green light growing brighter and more unsettling with each passing second. The alien glyphs pulsed faster, the green light growing brighter and more unsettling with each passing second. George felt a primal urge to flee, to escape the monolith's malevolent influence. "We have to go now," he shouted over the deafening hum. The team raced through the undergrowth, their hearts pounding as the sound of chittering insectoid creatures grew louder behind them. The ground began to crack and split beneath their feet, the planet itself seeming to come alive with malice. Fissures opened in the earth, and swarms of the nightmarish creatures poured out, their mandibles snapping and eyes glinting with hunger. George fired his weapon into the mass of writhing bodies, the acrid smell of burning chitin filling the air. As they neared the ship, Mikhail stumbled, his leg caught in a tangle of vines that seemed to reach out with cruel intent. George skidded to a halt, turning back to help his friend. He grabbed Mikhail's arm, pulling with all his strength as the creatures closed in. The vines tightened their grip, but with a burst of desperate energy, George managed to yank Mikhail free. They sprinted the last few meters to the ship, the creatures snapping at their heels. Just as they leaped through the airlock, a massive serpentine creature burst from the ground, its maw filled with rows of jagged teeth. The ship's engines roared to life, and they blasted off the planet's surface, the creature's jaws snapping shut on empty air. As they hurtled through the atmosphere, a blinding flash of green light erupted behind them. The monolith exploded, sending out a shockwave that rattled the ship, nearly knocking them off course. George gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles white as he watched the planet below shudder and convulse. It was as if the monolith's destruction had triggered some sort of seismic event, the surface rippling like water. "Scan the planet," George ordered, his voice tight with tension. "I want to know what the hell we're dealing with." The ship's sensors probed the depths of the alien world, and the results that flashed across the screen sent a chill down George's spine. The planet's core was not the molten rock they had expected, but a pulsating organic mass, like a gigantic beating heart. The readings suggested that the entire planet was a living, sentient being, and the monolith was just one of many nodes in a vast, interconnected network. George felt a creeping sense of dread as he realized the true scope of what they had stumbled upon. This was not just a hostile new species or a dangerous, uncharted world. It was something far more ancient and terrifying, a threat that had been lurking in the shadows of the galaxy for untold eons. And the Galactic Council's Recon fleet, he now understood, was just the beginning of a much larger, more sinister plot. They had unwittingly awakened something that had been slumbering for centuries, and now it was stirring, ready to unleash its fury upon the unsuspecting galaxy. George's mind raced as he tried to process the implications of their discovery. He knew they had to warn the Council, to prepare for the coming storm. But a part of him feared that it might already be too late, that the wheels of some ancient cosmic horror had already been set in motion. George and his crew limped back to the Galactic Council chambers, their hearts heavy with the weight of their grim discoveries. As they entered the grand hall, the chatter of the assembled representatives fell silent, all eyes turning to the battered and weary explorers. Zephyr rose from his seat, his expression a mix of concern and anticipation. "Captain Shaw, what news do you bring from the Orion sector?" George stepped forward, his scarred face etched with pain and exhaustion. "Council members, what we found out there. It defies all reason, all understanding. The Recon fleet, they're gone. Destroyed by something ancient, something terrible." He tapped a few commands into the central console, and a holographic image of the monolith flickered to life, its alien glyphs pulsing with an unsettling green light. The council members recoiled, some hissing in shock and fear. "This thing, it's not just a structure. It's a node, part of a vast network that spans the entire planet, and the planet itself." George's voice faltered for a moment. "It's alive, sentient, and it's not happy that we disturbed it." The council erupted into a cacophony of voices, some demanding immediate action, others pleading for restraint. Zarax, a battle-scarred alien with a reputation for ruthlessness, slammed his fist on the table. "We must seize this opportunity," he bellowed. "This planet, this entity, it could hold the key to unimaginable power. We must mount a full-scale invasion, study it, harness its secrets for ourselves." Others murmured in agreement, their eyes gleaming with a mix of fear and greed. But George shook his head, his voice low and urgent. "No, we can't, we mustn't. What's out there, it's beyond our comprehension, beyond our control. If we try to tamper with it, we'll be unleashing something far worse than we can imagine." He looked around the room, meeting each council member's gaze in turn. "I propose a quarantine. Seal off the entire Orion sector. Forbid any travel or exploration in the area. It's the only way to contain this threat, to protect the galaxy from what lies within." The debate raged on for hours, voices rising and falling like the tides. In the end, the council agreed to George's plan, though not without dissent. Zarax and his allies seethed with barely contained anger, their eyes flashing with a dangerous light. As the meeting adjourned, George pulled Mikhail aside, his voice low and urgent. "We need to keep an eye on Zarax and his cronies. I don't trust them not to try something stupid, something that could put us all in danger." Mikhail nodded, his jaw set. "I'll assemble a team, set up a covert outpost on the edge of the quarantine zone. We'll monitor any activity, make sure no one tries to breach the perimeter." George clapped him on the shoulder, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. "Good man, I'll join you out there once I've tied up some loose ends here." As they parted ways, George couldn't shake the feeling of unease that coiled in his gut. He knew deep down that this was only the beginning, that the true horror was yet to come. Weeks later, George and his team huddled in their hidden outpost, monitoring the eerie stillness of the Orion sector. The quarantine had held, no ships daring to venture into the forbidden zone. But something was different. Something had changed. The transmissions began slowly at first, faint whispers in the same alien language they had heard on the planet's surface. But as the days passed, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they became a constant, maddening buzz in the back of their minds. George pored over the encrypted messages, his brow furrowed in concentration. The patterns were shifting, the frequency increasing. It was as if the entity was gathering its strength, preparing for something big. He sent a final desperate message to the Council, warning them of the impending danger. But even as he hit the transmit button, he knew it was too late. The outpost's sensors screamed to life, alarms blaring as they detected a massive energy surge from the heart of the Orion sector. George and his team rushed to the viewports, their eyes widening in horror at the sight that greeted them. A monstrous shape emerged from the depths of space, blotting out the stars with its writhing, tentacled form. It was the planet, the entity, unfolding itself like a nightmarish flower, its tendrils reaching out to ensnare the Council's ships that hung in orbit. George watched helplessly as the ships were dragged into the entity's gaping maw, their hulls crumpling like tin foil under the immense pressure. He could hear the screams of the crew, feel their terror and despair as they were consumed by the ancient, insatiable hunger. And in that moment, he knew that the Council's hubris, their greed, had doomed them all. The galaxy, as they knew it, would soon be devoured, consumed by a force beyond their darkest nightmares. As the entity began its inexorable march across the stars, George and his team could only watch in numb, helpless silence. They were the last remnants of the Council, the only ones who knew the true extent of the horror that had been unleashed. Their only hope, slim as it might be, was to warn the other races, to spread the word of the coming darkness before it consumed them all. But even as they set out on their desperate mission, George couldn't shake the feeling that it was all for naught, that the galaxy was already lost. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.